Welcome to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast for club owners, operators, and fitness professionals. Each week, host Bryan O'Rourke brings you an expert interview with a global influencer at the crossroads of fitness and technology. You gain the insights, tools, and inspiration you need to stay connected to the pulse for what matters most for your business in the age of exponential technologies.
Well, hello, listeners, and welcome to the podcast. I'm your host, Bryan O'Rourke, and it is hot as Hades down here in the South. It's going to be 100 degrees today, so I hope your August, wherever you are in the world, isn't as warm as it is down here around New Orleans. We have a great podcast today, episode 152, with my good friend and colleague, Rick Mayo. Rick and I served together on the ACE Industry Advisory Council, which was great, and I have been working with him at Alloy during his license period, and now as he's franchising, we have a pretty broad conversation about a bunch of different things. We talk about technology, we talk about economics, we talk about a bunch of different things. He's a very entertaining and intriguing guy, so he's really interviewing me here a little bit, and he recorded this for his podcast as well, which you can see in the show notes. We'll have links to all of his stuff. Alloy's personal training model has really blown up in the last 2 years. He's got about 150 locations under development, and they're rapidly opening them. And Rick's just an all-around great guy. So I hope you enjoy this conversation and that your summer isn't as hot as it is down here in the New Orleans area. So without further ado, let's welcome Rick and get the interview going.
Bryan O'Rourke. Good to see you, my friend.
Rick.
How are you?
Thanks for making time, man.
Of course. Hey, I want to do Did You Know, but I want to make sure that in case people have been living under a rock, there may be people listening, I know this is hard to believe, who don't know who you are.
I would say that should be you first, me second.
I don't think so. So for anyway, listen, you've done a lot of amazing things and are still doing them. So can you just tell our listeners, about yourself?
God, I hate talking about myself.
You really do?
Yeah,
It's
really
so uncomfortable.
do.
I just love watching you squirm. I'm like, Bryan's an amazing guy. Tell us how amazing you are. He just about wants to drop under the desk.
Bryan K. O'Rourke with a Y. Google it. There
Right.
you go. I have a background in finance, and I worked in the food business for a long time with a very well-known entrepreneur before his passing, Al Copeland, who's the founder of Popeyes. And we owned a lot of different things he did. Then I worked as his chief financial officer, did that for years, and then got into technology and then in the fitness space and franchising. I grew a number of well-known global brands. Smoothie King Franchises is an example, which we were stakeholders in, and others. And then got involved in fitness toward the late 90s and have done a lot of things in that space. In the last 7 years, I've closed 19 M&A transactions in the space, and we own 14 operating companies around the world. So from a chain of health clubs in Bangkok we're involved in, all the way to other businesses like Vertimax, and then of course we are proud to assist Alloy in its growth trajectory.
Every time I dig into your background, I always wonder how I have you sitting at this desk right now, because I don't know how you do it, man. You're so busy and you have so much going on, and you're in high demand. And look, it's you're the only guy I know who can just post a picture on LinkedIn and get 500 likes, and everyone's like, "Oh, Bryan, I'm so glad you're doing well." I mean, you're just that dude, man. And I think it's a testament, to me, through my lens, you're just a guy who's super giving, who helps a lot of people. And obviously with your knowledge that you have opportunities to do a lot of that, but you really take your opportunities and do good with them. Does that make sense?
Oh, I'd like to think that. I mean, but you're the same way. So, we've known each other for a while now.
Yeah, 20 years or so,
yeah,
right?
it's almost that long. We sat on the ACE advisory
That's where
deal.
We officially met.
Yeah, and then you were working on the Alloy stuff years starting ago, and I watched you through that, and then you're franchising. Right. So
Bryan always gives me the creeps a little bit, because I know he knows where I'm going, but he's very gracious and nice, and so I can say, "Hey, this is what I'm thinking," and I just get this weird Bryan smile. What? He's like, "No, I mean, that's good, man. That's hey, man, go for it." I'm like, "No, Bryan, tell me." He's like, you're like, "Nah, it's not." I'm like, "Tell me." I'm shaking him by his lapels, Speaking of lapels, he's also the sharpest dresser I know.
I didn't wear my best suit today, but I tried to be a little summary for you.
You always look good. Always looking sharp. So Well, also, like, I mean, just for did you start the Fit Tech Council, or are you just the president of it, or is that like?
Yeah, it was started by Intel, actually.
Okay,
with a group of folks, and it originally was designed as Fitness Industry Technology Council to create standards. And very soon after I was put in that position, I figured out that wasn't going to happen. So what we've done instead is kind of promote, our mission is promoting the thoughtful adoption of technology.
Ooh, I like that.
And thoughtful being the operative
I was
term.
about to say, I like that terminology. No, that's perfect. I love it.
So thoughtful. Because,
and then you were on the URSA board for a minute.
Yes, I was there for 5 years during the COVID thing. And
man, good time to have you on that
brought
board.
Liz Clark in as CEO, and she's been great, and made great colleagues and friends in that group. So,
gosh, I can't even think of all the other things. I know you left out a lot, but listen, just hook up with Bryan on LinkedIn, anywhere on social media. He's also really good at marketing, which sounds really weird because he has an MBA in finance, but I don't know. This guy's just something else. He's pretty much good at everything. So anyway, I hate to pull you out of your intellectual mind and all of these gifts that you have. Let's do Did You Know? So what do you have for me, Bryan?
So did you know that for every 74 guys in the United States that graduate with an undergraduate degree, 100 women today are graduating with an undergraduate degree? And it gets worse in the graduate school as far as the disparity goes. That's an interesting fact.
I have heard that. What do you have any idea why that is? Like, why do you think that is?
It's it's a big question. I'm not sure I know all the whys, but there's a lot to consider and unpack there. But certainly things are changing when it comes to those dynamics where men used to graduate with degrees far greater numbers than women, and that has absolutely changed.
I hear it from girls that I know that are sort of late 20s, early 30s. There's this weird mismatch, if you will, of sometimes employment, income, earning potential, educational. There's a gap between that age group, between the males and females, right?
Yep.
And it's interesting because that causes all sort of cascading effects with dating.
Yes.
You feel like if you're not intellectually matched with someone, if you're not professionally matched with them, financially, whatever that may be, it's just different, and it causes issues, right? So I don't know what to say about that long term. But yeah, I think if you're an old guy and you want to date young girls, it's a pretty good sign. You're probably gonna.
Well, let's say gender roles are changing in many respects,
right.
And we see it with the decline of birth of children globally, the effect of that. Women, entering leadership in the workforce in greater numbers. There's still ways to go there, but you can see what's happening.
But we're talking about that top echelon. Yeah. Everyone is always like, oh, you've got, look at Elon Musk or look at Bezos or whatever. I'm like, look, man, that substrata of individuals is so small, but just below that layer, it is much more equal than it's been, right? And will continue to be so.
Yes,
that's
interesting.
So. Yeah. Well, mine's not nearly as thoughtful.
I don't know about that. I can't wait to hear.
It's so dumb. So there's a Dr. Donald Unger conducted a 60-year experiment. Now that's commitment. That's data, right? To prove that his mother was wrong about arthritis from knuckle cracking. Every day he cracked the knuckles in only his left hand for 60 years. Can you imagine the commitment to this?
Now that is a did you know, like none other.
And so after 60 years, he had not developed arthritis in his left hand. It was no different than the right. So if you ever wondered, cracking your knuckles, did your mama tell you that cracking your knuckles will give you arthritis? The answer is no, and you can thank Dr. Unger for 60 years of knuckle cracking.
Thank you, Dr. Unger.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, all right, without further ado, I really had a hard time, and I was really trying to nail Bryan down to a topic, and it's like, he's a smart guy, and I mean, he's read, super well read, things that I find fascinating and love to talk to him about it. We'll go to dinner tonight, and I'll pick his brain for hours on end. But he does have some, I would say, levels of expertise. He speaks all over the world. He's a sought-after keynote speaker. And I think that you are, I guess the word would be futurist. I know that's kind of a loose term. I don't know what that means. I don't know if you like that or not. But really, like, if you want somebody who can relevantly take a peek at what's going on now and what it's going to mean, and nobody can predict the future, but I think Bryan does a really good job of extrapolating data and saying, okay, based on where we're headed, this is what I can see, at least in the foreseeable future, right? Next few years we're here, maybe it ends up there, and then he can adjust as he goes. So I just want to ask you questions today, probably just topics overall, and just start conversation, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'd love that.
So we were talking offline a little bit before we started just about the economy. And everyone is a fatalist these days, certainly around the economy.
Yes.
And you're very bullish on the U.S. economy especially. So I just want to hear your thoughts on that, why you feel that way, and what your lens is.
Well, the United States, as we've seen in the recent past, I think in the last 18 months, the Fed has taken rates up 11 times. There were a lot of very worried people, hand-wringing going on around a recession. And the recession's never come. The United States, behind Saudi, which is a much smaller economy, relatively speaking, has had the most robust economy in the world in the last several years. We've outperformed all of our peers when it comes to GDP growth. And there's a lot that's going right. Obviously, there's some systemic issues, but there's a lot that's going right. And I wrote about this a couple of years ago in the post-COVID economy and what we saw happen back at the end of World War I with the Spanish flu pandemic. And we had a roaring 20s that happened. And I really think that we're here right now. I think that the economy is just outperformed, and I think it's going to continue to do very, very well. Because of immigration and some other factors, our population decline because the slower birth rate really hasn't been as extreme as
and contrary to popular belief, because I think that just the general common line of thinking is like, oh, it's too many people, it's stressing the system. But the real facts are you need population. Like a declining population is a real risk.
Yes.
When you look at China, right?
Yes.
They have a massively fast declining population. That's a huge risk for their economy and for their country overall, right?
That's right. And you have to have young people coming up to, stoke demand and create the next, and also become earners to help older people that are, getting to the end of their careers, et cetera. So it's very important to the economy. Also, the thing about the United States is we're energy independent and we're food independent, which are really critical dynamics when you look at a world that's deleveraging, outsourcing as a result of supply chain challenges. And we still are the leading educator in the world on most fronts in STEM. So there's a lot that's really good about the U.S. economy, and it's been highly underestimated.
And why do you think that is? Because have you read, is it Steven Pinker's book?
Yes.
It's basically all the stats on like everything in the world is infinitely better than it's ever been. Yes. Yet if you just listen to mainstream media, the whole thing's going to hell in a handbag. We're on fire, right? But it's not the reality of it. So. And why do you think maybe specifically just the U.S.? I mean, is there a political angle to make it seem worse than it is? Is it just the way we're wired to be attracted to salacious negative headlines? I mean, why would we underreport the success of the economy?
Well, that's a big question. If you look back in history in the United States, there was always contention between different factions of people. I mean, it's always been that way. Being a federation like we are and having, the discourse we have is all part of our history. Mm-hmm. Some people, I think that recent happenings are some anomaly. Right. And they're not.
No.
The question is, do our institutions strong enough to navigate those things? And, I think the American people generally are fairly optimistic. We're a highly diverse population. We have a lot of great things to rely on, like a solid judiciary, real rule of law being enforced, all these things. We're the global currency, and we control the sea lanes. So there's a lot that's good about it for us, and I think it's just going to be a very good run for the next 5 to 6 years. We'll have some glitches here and there, but I'm very bullish on the U.S. economy in general. I think in the business you're in, especially, with what Alloy is doing, there's just going to be a tremendous amount of growth. Our estimations in the last year for economy growth in wellness services is going to be 6% annual compounded growth rate.
Nice.
Yeah, which means the industry will double in about 10 years.
Yeah, and I don't want to get ahead of us because I have another point. I think in that more tech side, like what does that human-to-human experience look like? Right?
Yes.
I think that's going to be big. So U.S. economy doing well. Is there any other economies globally that you see from your lens that are not doing as well, that have made some mistakes that are leading to less than stellar performance, that are maybe being underreported? I mean, what's your view outside the U.S.?
Yeah, I think again, we don't have a crystal ball, but I think that China is really not nearly. China has huge problems. I mean, we all have problems. They have huge problems, and they're going to be dealing with a lot of things in the coming years. Germany is really dealing with a lot of challenges right now, and with those countries and those significant economies, they're not energy independent. They can't grow their own food supply. So they're facing some challenges. And those are some great economies. So we'll see what the net is in the years to come.
Do you enjoy spending time just looking at patterns and putting these thoughts together? Do you enjoy that?
Oh yeah,
I get the impression that you do.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, I love it. Especially, I'm not, they're historians, so I'll read a lot of people's thinking, like you do, I think. And so you try to get a perspective. Doesn't mean you're always right, but it helps you, at least in my situation, interpret things in a way that I maybe make it a little more digestible. Yeah,
exactly.
Because it's a crazy
and I
world.
appreciate that. That's why I like to hang out with you and get the Cliff Notes for sure. Because I'm not going to read the Quran and all the other religious teachings.
The Upanishads.
I'm not going to read that either.
Stuff,
Exactly. But I would like you to read it and summarize it for me. So thank you very much. So, all right. So bullish on the U.S. economy, which is obviously great news for everyone. And I tend to agree. It's just really hard to sift through it all unless you're going to sit in maybe your seat as like an economist and an MBA in finance and really understand what you're looking at. It's really easy to be swayed by negative headlines.
Yes.
And again, the infighting that happens amongst political parties and that type of thing.
Yeah.
So look, I mean, you're head of the Fitness Technology Council. I love the idea, some of the terminology used. Obviously, AI is a big deal right now, whether it be ChatGPT, which is just really a language app, right, at the end of the day. But still, like, where do you see, at least in the foreseeable future, 5 to 10 years, maybe that may be too far out because it's moving fast, where do you see AI fitting into, let's just say, overall society to start with, right? Or technology, they can bundle those together if you don't mind.
Well, first thing, I think that, as you know, if you look around, there's something called the hype cycle. And it's this curve that does this, and it goes through phases where there's this heightened sense of expectation. A lot of people talk about it. It's all they're talking about, like self-driving cars a few years back.
Right.
And then it kind of peaks, and then there's a trough of disillusionment. That's going to come for AI. And then you get to a plateau of productivity where you're actually adopting these things and using them in real cases. Now, not that ChatGPT-4 and its iterations to come aren't very interesting tools that are doing a lot of cool things, but it's certainly not the exploration of what is ultimately going to be general AI. These are large learning, language models,
right?
And they have their problems,
right?
And if you've used Siri for a while or any of these different types of tools, they don't work half the time.
Right.
So that doesn't make it bad, but I think we get a little hyped up about things that don't necessarily deserve the hype yet. And it's really, I think, us being mindful of, well, how could we use these things? But I think it's a very interesting technology. Being an older guy, I can think back to the 80s where this was a thing then. You had people doing things. So, but in the larger sense of it, it's certainly the idea of taking data and having machines and processing power, being able to do more and more things more effectively is really going to be the bottom line to what this is, right?
Now, do you think, because I think, at least for me, I think the early disruption, even from like a ChatGPT or some of the early AI, it's been surprising because you would think it would happen at the manufacturing level, assembly line, again, automated driving, so truck drivers, like these are the things that will be disruptive, but we're not really seeing that. So what do you see like right now is the areas that are maybe most at risk from the current AI offerings?
Well, to get back to, before I get into the current areas at risk, Amazon wouldn't be able to execute its warehouse delivery distribution system without the robots it uses to do what it does. So there are implications of this stuff when it comes to manufacturing or other more mundane type tasks. But the big thing for what's going to happen in a matter of time, and it could be 4 to 8 years, could be a little faster, could be a little slower, is knowledge workers. And this is where I think you're going to see disruption, just like you saw it in the agricultural economy of several hundred years ago before automation occurred. A pretty large percentage of the world was employed in working in fields. And that changed. Now, around 1% of the world is working in that dynamic. And of course, what replaced that was a knowledge economy, an information economy. And so we got computers and accountants and lawyers and all, service models around that became a big component of economics. So And now we're making another shift. And, it's been written about that there is going to become what's going to be termed a useless class. And that's going to be a number of people who are bookkeepers or other types of professionals doing things that machines will replace. And so the question is, what's the next wave? And I think the next wave is experiences. It's the experience economy has been a dynamic for a while. It's been written about for a while. I think technology will come in and impact the experience economy as well. But I think it's, for what it is, that's a little further out. And so I think that what's going to become valuable increasingly is real human interaction.
Isn't that strange, right? Like
the
technology would create the need for more human interaction. You see that even, well, you wrote probably the best piece and the most well-read piece, at least in our industry, about what was going on with Peloton and the Peloton purchasing an equipment manufacturer that's in our industry, and just sort of what that meant, maybe the valuation of the stock. And it was all very temporary based on the pandemic. But it was just a really well thought out piece, and it's sort of, some of that was about where we are now, which is what you're saying, human to human, right?
Correct.
And so when you say experience economy, like, give me some examples. Like, what type of experiences? Like, it probably covers a vast array of industries, services, or whatnot. But do you have any examples that you can think of?
Yeah, and before I get into some of those examples, let me clarify. So it's not, what we're talking about is commoditization of fundamental things. So it's not that the economy around bookkeeping will go away, or the economy around gyms like Planet Fitness will go away, because it's a highly commoditized offering, really.
Right.
So those things will still be part of the economy. The question is, how are you going to deliver value? Like, 'cause there's going to be value delivered in that commoditized world. It's just going to be more challenging to create value in that world as a commodity offering.
Right.
So when you're looking at a value, that idea is, well, I'm going to put 2 and 2 together. It's going to meet in 5, right? So that I can define that context first before I get into it. You can see it with travel right now. You can do commoditized travel, or you can do highly curated travel. You're going on a trip soon. You're just talking about experiences, for example, that you can go on Airbnb and buy experiences with people right online, and they take you around to, curated food experiences in Italy where you're going, or these are the value people are going to be willing to pay for those types of things is going to go up as services become more commoditized. The same with pretty much in fitness, the same dynamic. Not that you won't have tools to help you do what you need to do, your apps or whatever, but people are going to pay a premium for human interaction, because as a lot of their other life interactions become commoditized and highly convenient, they're just happening in the background. That is not going to really be seen as much as a value add as these things that we're describing.
I mean, that's really interesting, and I'm glad to hear you say that in some ways, because one of the questions that we'll often get in the franchise is like, listen, what type of technology, like, are you considering AI? What type of iterations are you looking at? And of course, the answer is always yes, right? Everyone considering all things, but the final lens is, will these things enhance the human-to-human experience? If not, no. I mean, our name says personal training. It's like, it can't be any more experiential than that, at least human-to-human, right?
That's right.
And at least we're not in a spot yet where, like, AI, where The Rock pops up in your mirror and he's talking to you as a friend and trains you, right? And looks at your form and makes you feel like you have a friend. It's like, we're not there yet. And until we're there, any technology has to pass the final lens. Is this going to enhance the human-to-human connection, or is it going to replace it or diminish it, right? That's sort of our final lens.
And that's a very smart lens to have. It's like with FITSE, the Fitness Industry Technology Council, we moved away from standards to helping people think through exactly what you're describing.
I love it, man.
It's thoughtful adoption. Not let's jump on the hype cycle and do this because we can say we're doing it, when it's not really having a real impact on what value you're really delivering in the context of the user experience you're trying to create.
Why do you think we go there? Like, just the humans in general, like, we fall in love with, like, gadgets and things, right? And so people, and you've seen this in the industry, they fall in love with the thought of, like, an AI widget that can do this in place of, and then they build all these things, and there is some complexity there, and I'm not even sure why it's built, because when you and you zoom out and you look at it from, say, crop duster height, it's just a bunch of things
Yeah.
that, create actually more complication, but we fall in love with the things,
Yes.
right? And I'm sure in that role with the Fit Tech Council, it's like you probably see a million things and people are so excited about them, right? But when you really look at them through the lens that you're talking about, it might even work against you in so many ways, right?
Yes.
To help you build a brand or a business.
That's right.
But what do you think it is about us? Is, I guess, just human nature, or what is it about us that gets us so excited about these new tech widgets and these little things, right?
Yeah.
That we want to deploy all of them in our business when in fact it could be hurting us.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a couple of things. There are many factors, but I think a big thing is that when we went into the information economy, we're pretty much into after World War II, and we really grew our economy that way. What became highly valued was analytical thinking, efficiencies, all these things that were very much about the information economy and creating value in that dynamic. So I think that people are just applying that, I knew this, I learned this, so I'm going to extrapolate this way. So if you can show me a tool that does this thing 5 times better, that's what I want.
Faster, less people,
Correct.
more efficient,
Correct.
less expensive, whatever those things
That's
are.
right. And that's not necessarily the litmus test anymore as far as when you talk about commoditization, because when you're competing against machines and that's your strategy, you're going to lose. Like you're not going to be able to create value.
Right.
And so I think people are just enamored with that because it's been part of our recent kind of past, our ethos, in developed countries, et cetera. And a lot less attention has been paid to emotional intelligence, empathy, understanding. We were talking about the plasticity of your brain and your mind.
I was about to say, let's talk about that a little bit, if you don't mind going there.
No, because it's very linear.
Because that's the way we're, through the lens of what you're saying, that's the way we're going to need to think to navigate this next phase of technology.
That's right.
Relevantly.
That's
Do you
right.
agree?
That's right. I think that is it. Because if you're going to become part of the commoditization monster, then you're really not doing anything to create value. And so you have to rethink. And as Toffler brought up in his books, Future Shock, if anyone knows who Alvin Toffler is, The Third Wave, he was very popular in his day. And he talked about the people that are really going to succeed in the coming years are going to be people that can unlearn to relearn. And that's very hard to do because as creatures, we're survivalists. We want to survive. And so if it's worked for us in the past, we want to stick to what we know.
Right.
It's very hard to change your perspective. And as we're into an era of hyper change, it's so much is changing externally for people in many realms. Human beings tend to hold on even tighter to what they've known versus saying, I need to rethink this. Because as Einstein said, if you bring the same level of thinking to solve a problem that thinking created, you're not going to solve the problem.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Well, that's a whole paradigm shift for everyone then. And unfortunately, the people that are seemingly at the top of their fields all are there with this certain line of thinking.
Yes.
And it'll be interesting as they are disrupted because, if the very thing that's next is diametrically opposed to what you are or your success journey to get there, you're going to fight it tooth and nail, even if you don't consciously think you're doing it.
That's correct.
So there's going to be an interesting little friction there, and you're going to see this whole new line of leaders emerge that have a whole different paradigm of thinking. Do you agree?
I agree. I think that, and I think you're seeing it. But the Netflix parable, people always talk about that story and they're failing, but it's NASA with SpaceX, it's Mercedes and Tesla, it's Google and Open, ChatGPT, OpenAI. It's the innovator's dilemma that we're referring to.
Yeah.
It's still very strong and present, and you got to break some things. You got to break your kind of thinking, and that's hard to do. It can be done, but it's hard to do.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, love it. Let's bring it home a little bit. So, fitness industry, that's obviously us. You're obviously well-versed and involved and invested in the fitness industry. How does some of the technology pieces, even some of the global economy, what do you see next 5 years or so would be the future of the fitness industry?
Yeah, well, I think, more holistic. It's not just about fitness, right? It's nutrition, sleep, all these components, right, for a better life, higher quality of life. There's huge demand for these services. They're not going away. They're going to become more profound. and what people expect from them or seek out from them. As you know, we really don't have a lot of integrative solutions around that.
Yeah.
If you're part of the sick care system, as you know, anybody out there, they know,
Yeah, right.
even with the best doctors, they're really not integrated into solving for people's health. You're either getting a guy or a gal writing you scripts for meds, they're taking certain tests. A lot of those tests are inadequate in their depth. And then there's an inadequate amount of service and help for people to see what they can do preventatively in many ways.
Well, that's not the business model.
That's right.
It doesn't pay to be preventative.
Correct. Right? It doesn't. And if you've been to a doctor recently, you'd know that. And so I think there's a huge subset of demand, and I think it's just going to continue to grow.
Do you think it'll be fractionalized? Because obviously I'm looking at it through my lens as a franchisor. Like, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I often describe what we do, like what's the best seat to be in if you're going to be in the fitness business, and I'm air quoting. It's like, well, if you could envision a wheel, there's a hub in the middle, and the spokes are all these components that you talked about, right?
Yeah.
And so you can have nutrition, supplementation, recovery, sleep, mental health, stress management, all the things, right? And we all understand that, like eating well and exercise, this is a huge portion of all these things, right?
Yes.
But if you can envision yourself sitting in the hub, in the middle of the wheel, and helping to pull all these resources into someone's life. So it's like, this wheel is a human being, right? And you're in the hub, you're their core, and then you're going to pull in all of these other resources for this person, for this point in time. This is what they need, right? Mm-hmm. And you've got the resources to pull all those things in. At least for where I sit, for the foreseeable future, that would be the best seat to be in, because that's the integrative approach that you're talking about. And you don't have to have all of the things. Like, what I'm not saying is, have a brick and mortar concept that's got all of these 15, 16 things. I really haven't seen that work. But if you can sit in the advisor role, if you will, in the middle, and you can pull in those resources to help people, great. Because there are, like, at least in the franchise space, there are people fractionally doing different parts and pieces of this. Hormone replacement, great. Okay, that's one thing, but that's one thing, right? And then you've got cold tub, and you've got all the things around it, right? But they're all sort of splintered. Do you see room for an all-encompassing concept? Like, what's your idea on what? So I'm going to open a wellness model. I just want to help people. I want to get people to a healthier place. Like, I'm going to open a business, brick and mortar or virtual. Like, is there a place where you can aggregately pull all this stuff together? Or are you best off just choosing a channel and sticking with it? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I think it's the answer to that question lies into what we just described about commoditization versus value add, right?
Yep.
And it's those things will be pursued in different ways and different combinations. What I do know is the greatest business models in this regard haven't been invented yet. And there's no doubt, because that always is the way it is. But if you were to ask the question, where would you like to be placed, that is where you'd like to be placed. Whatever you want to label it or however you want to spin it. And whether it's Diamandis's concept that they've rolled out and it's more medically oriented, but it's certainly far more primary prevention, or if it's Blue Zones thing they're opening in Miami, those, given the different proclivities of those models, the bottom line is that demand for those services in that manner you're describing is really the ultimate growth market, in my opinion.
Right. In any way, shape, or form that you can get your toe in that water,
That's
you should do it. Yeah.
That's right. And you look at, and look, there will be fitness models like Planet, they service, but that's a commoditization play.
Yep.
And good for them. They'll service a market.
Somebody's got to be there.
Yeah, that's okay. But if you're going to compete and you're going to add value, I'd rather be in another position for the long run.
Yeah, we often talk about that. Like, there's obviously, just take fitness, and there's two ends of the spectrum. It's like, you can be, like, to your point, on the commoditized end, and what are you going to do? Your memberships for $8 because they do 10. I mean, like, what are we doing, right? There's not much to do down there. But then it just seems easier, maybe the way that I'm wired, to be on the other end of the spectrum and just provide a very personalized concierge level of experience.
Yes.
Pull some of these wellness things in.
People are going to pay a premium for this.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just a better place to be, because you can take fewer people that you can actually affect change with, run a good business model, and at least in your small corner of the world, you can actually make a pretty decent change, right? It's just a different model altogether.
I agree. And I think that's going to be, as I said, I'm very bullish on that market. There'll be interesting things like Alloy that's emerging, growing very well. Congratulations.
Appreciate that.
And some others that keep going into that vein, and I think those concepts are going to be the ones that are going to see superior returns, a premium paid for their delivery of service, because that's what people are going to seek.
Yep. Yeah, I often joke, like, we're slowly but surely, and this is actually coming from franchisees, which is good, is our base price keeps creeping up.
Yeah.
So we've got tiered pricing, but we've got bold, really smart franchisees who are like, man, we could sell this all day long because they see the value in it. And lo and behold, that trickles down to the team and it goes to the community, and they're selling it, tier 4 when they might have been in the tier 3 market, right? So we're sort of helping them along and coercing the ones, or sort of like motivating the others to kind of move along and increase their rates. But I think in doing so, I don't know, it maybe just speaks even better to this particular group, and it's going to allow us to continue just to put more juice into the exact same thing. Exactly what you've said. Like, what else can we put around this service that keeps us in that hub seat? If that makes sense.
No, it does to me. And bifurcation of the market has been going on for a while in consumers markets. I think it's just going to continue to do this, where commoditization is going to be clearly commoditization, and people, might use that for any number of purposes, but the profit and sustainability and the real value chain is going to be at the other side.
I think even if you take boutique fitness, Brian, you already see that a little bit. Like, if you're in the 20 people getting sweaty market, there's a lot of other people there. There's a bit of a commoditization there, right?
Big time.
See, Orange Theory is still about 20% off brand-wide coming out of COVID. It's
Correct.
like, there's a lot of other stuff that gets you sweaty with 25 people, right?
Correct.
Where and then now there's the birth again of all the recovery franchises and all the kind of things, in that regard. But it's just going to be interesting to see. So, I don't know. I like the seat we're in, and I'm glad that you see it the same way. But
I do. I think it's a good seat to be in.
I appreciate that. Well, listen, everyone, I could take more of his time, but I'm pretty sure he's got to go do some world-changing phone calls and some other things. But anyway, it's an honor, honestly.
Listen, you've done a great job with your podcast,
friend.
man. I watch it. Of course, our team works on it.
This will help me a lot because it's been up to this point my mom and one of my cousins. So I think we can add another family member as a viewer by having Bryan O'Rourke on. But ladies and gentlemen, Bryan O'Rourke, appreciate you,
Thanks,
my friend.
Rick. Appreciate you spending time, brother.
Thanks.
Good to see you. Hello, listeners. This is Bryan O'Rourke, and thanks so much for listening to the Fitness Plus Technology Podcast. The podcast is made possible by the Fitness Industry Technology Council, a consortium of global brands working together to enhance the adoption of technologies in the fitness space. Our company, Videri Ventures, which is invested in Vertimax, Montezuma, Gold's Gym, Houston, Texas, and Fitness 24/7 Thailand, also underwrites the podcast, along with our service companies, Integris Advisors, Moon Mission Media, and others. Please feel free to share this podcast with your colleagues. And if I can be of any assistance to you, don't hesitate to reach out, bryanko'rourke@gmail.com, or find me on any of the major social networks. Have a great day, and thanks for listening.